Already there.
Got it. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Martha's Vineyard Commission's sponsoring presentation by Christine Medore of Mass Housing Partnership on the Complete Neighborhoods Initiative. And I believe at this point we have representation from almost all the towns. Do we have someone on from Oak Bluffs yet?
Gail is here.
Emma.
Oh, great. I can't see everyone on my screen.
Oh,
That's
I think
super.
Emma Green Beach is here as well.
Fantastic. So we have representation from all 6 towns, which is super. And I've met with all of your, oops, Alex, can you mute everyone, please? Or Bill? I'm getting
Really?
feedback.
Let me unmute you, Laura.
Oh, I was muted too, excuse me.
Okay.
Okay, great. So if everyone could keep themselves on mute unless you're asking a question, that would be great. That way we don't get feedback from each individual feed. So Christine, as I mentioned in the meetings with all of your select boards and affordable housing committees, Christine's going to talk about the Complete Neighborhoods Initiative and how this program supports communities in multiple ways and how it would apply to rural communities like the towns on Martha's Vineyard, and also what a multi-town application would look like and how those initiatives are supported through Mass Housing Partnership. Christine, can I just turn it over to you? I know you've got a fantastic PowerPoint prepared, and I know there's going to be a lot of questions, so we'll leave some room for questions at the end of the presentation.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Christine Medore, and thank you, Laura, for that introduction and putting this great meeting together. I'm sure it was no easy feat. She makes it look very effortless to get everyone together at the same time from multiple towns. So thank you for being here tonight, for making the time. As Laura had mentioned, I'm from the Mass Housing Partnership, and I'm going to pull up my screen if that works. It doesn't work.
Nope, just let me make you a co-host really good.
Alex.
Let me see. All right, you should be good.
Yep. Perfect. Thank you, Alex. So I'm happy to share this presentation after tonight's meeting. If you have not received a copy already, I did send it in advance and I switched around the order a little bit. So there's no real changes since you've seen it last. So I'm from the Mass Housing Partnership, and I'm really happy to come and did I freeze? No, I didn't freeze. Okay, sorry. Really happy to come tonight and talk about the Complete Neighborhoods Initiative, and specifically my program called the Complete Neighborhoods Partnership, and talk about how the 6 towns on Martha's Vineyard can get involved. So really quickly, the Mass Housing Partnership is a quasi-public agency. We also operate as a nonprofit. We work with cities and towns to create innovative policy and financing solutions that provide affordable housing and to better the lives for the people living in the Commonwealth. We do this in 4 ways. We have 4 teams. The first team, Community Assistance, is the team that I am on. We are kind of the outward-facing team of MHP. We provide technical assistance to all cities and towns in the Commonwealth. And we also provide trainings on a variety of affordable housing topics. We have a lending team that finances affordable rental housing projects. We have committed over $1.4 billion that created more than 27,000 affordable homes. We have a first-time home buyers program called the One Mortgage Program. It provides a affordability buy-down program so that it's a fixed rate 30-year mortgage with no PMI. We also like to call it the most affordable mortgage program in Massachusetts. And finally, we have the Center for Housing Data, a very robust team that collect and analyze all housing-related data so that communities that we work with can make informed decisions around affordable housing policy. Laura, I think Christina is trying to join. She's popping up on my screen, but I don't know if you can see her.
I'm not seeing that. Alex, can you see that? Alex, you're muted.
She's in the process of joining.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so before I get into the Complete Neighborhoods Initiative, I want to provide a bit of a context of how the program came to be. Back in January 2021, there was an Economic Development Bond Bill, also known as an Act Enabling Partnerships for Growth. It was adopted, and in the legislation, it authorized $50 million over 5 years, specifically for financial assistance in the form of grants or loans to accelerate and support the creation of low-income and moderate-income housing in close proximity to transit nodes. And this is language lifted directly from the legislation. And Massachusetts Housing Partnership was named as administrators of this bond funding. So we took about a year to figure out what to do with this funding. How should we approach what was tasked in the legislation? We decided that we want to tackle our biggest issues at its intersection. The big issues are climate change, transportation, and housing. It really is a systems approach to drive cumulative results. And we wanted to create complete neighborhoods. In these neighborhoods, people can access housing, jobs, schools, and their essential needs, services, and amenities without having to own or get in the car. So essentially, it's all organized around the human scale. And we believe that in these places, they should be rich in jobs, rich in opportunities in regards to housing, and also rich in mobility options. And we also believe that everyone deserves to live in places like these, regardless of their income. And we decided to create 3 programs under this initiative. First is the MBTA Communities Technical Assistance Program, also known as the 3ATA program. And as part of the legislation, it had tasked MHP to create a technical assistance program to help the 177 MBTA communities to adopt multifamily zoning that now they're required to adopt multifamily zoning that allows, multifamily development by right near their transit nodes. And second is my program, the Complete Neighborhoods Partnership. We provide expertise from planning, community engagement, and pre-development to help targeted districts to build capacity and readiness for investment for housing. And finally, we have a capital investment program that facilitates subsidies to actually help get these housing units built. And this funding is dispersed through DHCD, now known as HLC, through their annual funding rounds. So when we talk about mobility, we're not just talking about physical mobility and building homes and services and jobs and schools near transportation infrastructure so that there's an increase in physical mobility options. We believe that building these types of neighborhoods also increases economic mobility for people who live in these neighborhoods. We want to build a stronger region. There are many places across the Commonwealth where there has been a central place of commerce, of jobs and housing, but over the past 100 years or so, they've become more sprawling. And our idea is to strengthen these regions to decentralize from a lot of the hub and spoke system that we work off of. We want neighborhoods to be connected by high quality infrastructure of mobility infrastructure. And we are prioritizing public transit, pedestrian, and bicycle infrastructure over car dependent infrastructure. So these are the 4 main program goals under the Complete Neighborhoods Partnership Program. And these are directly lifted from the legislation language as well. First, increase economic opportunity for disadvantaged populations. We would like to do this by closing racial disparities in housing tenancy and cost burden and address gaps in homeownership rates. Next, create inclusive neighborhoods. This means making sure that affordable housing, subsidized affordable housing, is built near mobility hubs. Next, creating dense, compact, connected neighborhoods, meaning increasing walkable mixed-use neighborhoods with enough density to support future or mobility infrastructure. And finally, we hope that by creating these neighborhoods, it will reduce auto dependency and our impact on the climate. So how are we getting there with this program? The Complete Neighborhoods Partnership is really working to meet communities where they are at. So my question to you is, what is your recipe for success? We would like to help you identify and implement strategies to accelerate public and private investments in affordable housing near your mobility hubs. We can do this in 4 different ways: by building your community capacity through planning, such as district and master planning, land use and zoning analysis, policy development. And next, we can also help you engage with your community through visioning, through training, public meeting design and support, and place activation. We can help you get your properties ready for investment, and that's through pre-development, some site due diligence. We can help you draft RFPs. We can do architectural test fits for private properties. We can bring in consultants to help you assess financial feasibility of a project. And lastly, again, implementation, more about making a project work, financially work. We can do this through pro forma analyses, market analyses, and cost estimates. What this program isn't is we are not funding infrastructure improvements. We are not funding acquisitions, land acquisitions, and we would prefer to not help the towns prepare housing production plans, because we believe there are many resources out there to help communities prepare these plans. And finally, we're not providing funding to hire municipal staff or consultants that are not pre-approved by MHP. And what that means is that we already have 21 consultants with a range of expertise to deliver these technical assistance that I had described previously. So who can apply? Basically, all 351 cities and towns in the Commonwealth can apply. And just from my experience in the last year, almost all of the applicants have been municipalities. You can apply as a single community applicant, and the requirement is that we ask you to designate one complete neighborhood, what we call a complete neighborhood, so that we can target and concentrate our investment in that neighborhood. And that neighborhood should have existing or planned mobility hubs. So mobility hubs could be places where there's a large concentration of bus stops, or there are bike network trailheads, or their future planned mobility infrastructure, such as improvement of sidewalks. And we would like to see a reasonable amount of neighborhood density that could support future transit, because we run into this situation where there are places that are more rural, and I will talk about the Franklin County region in the next few slides, that there are more rural places where they do have regional transit in terms of bus service, but there isn't enough density to justify an increase in service or frequency of the service. So we would like to address this kind of a chicken and egg situation by opening up housing production opportunities so more transit could serve these places. So you can also apply as a region, and I'm speculating that Martha's Vineyard is going to take this path. So for a regional application, we would like each of the communities to designate a complete neighborhood in your community and identify one community as the regional center or a lead community. So even the lead community does not have to have a regional center. It's really just administratively for me to have one point person to reach out to, so that lead community is kind of helping coordinate a lot of the correspondence during the program duration. We would also like to see existing or planned mobility hubs in all the communities to ensure that we're building on that connectivity that I'm talking about among the neighborhoods. And we like to see documentation of local support from all the communities in your application. So this can mean a letter of support from your select board, could mean a letter of support from local organizations that you potentially could partner with during the program. So here are some partnership examples. I think maybe the connected region would apply to you most, rather than the connected neighborhoods or connected corridor. Like I said earlier, you do not have to identify a regional center. You can also identify multiple neighborhoods within one community if you decide to apply as a single community. And these are kind of real world examples of what each partnership could look like. So in Lowell, they have multiple neighborhoods, and they could definitely use a lot of help in increasing connectivity between each of these neighborhoods. And they actually did apply at last year and when the round opened, but unfortunately they were not chosen. I'm going to encourage them to apply again. For connected region, an example is the Crosstown Connect region. So these 7 communities around Concord, in the Concord area along Route 2, they are served by a regional bus service called Crosstown Connect that has been very successful. And there are definitely lots of housing production opportunities in each of the town. So I thought that was a really good example to note. And next is the Franklin County region. As you know, they did apply and we did select them for this round. They're served by a very robust regional transit authority, and our work is really to help them build on this mobility infrastructure and help them build housing opportunities around these transit nodes. And finally, a connected corridor example is along the Minuteman bike trail system. So we're not just focused on transit or bus service. We really also want to highlight any kind of mobility infrastructure that includes bike networks. So this is a good example. I'm going to pause there for questions before I talk about examples. If I can't see your faces, so if you have a question, feel free to just speak up.
Actually, if you could raise your yellow hand, then I can see you and unmute you. You should be able to do that with the 3 dots at the top of your screen. Elaine Miller has your hand up. You have to unmute, Elaine.
You know, I have multiple questions. I don't know where to start, okay? This seems to be directed toward the use of public transportation, which we do have on the island. And I happen to be chairman of the VTA here on the island. How does that impact that organization, and how do we interact with this program in our community? Because it services all the towns.
Yeah, so that's a really great question, and I will get into it a little bit more after, but I'm happy to address that now. So as part of the expectations for participating in this program, that we ask the community or the region to identify what we call a steering committee. So this committee, we consider a partnership for your region that you would, we're expecting that you recruit and convene stakeholders from different sectors. So one of them could be a transportation provider, like you mentioned, so that they have a seat at the table, making sure that the projects that are being funded are advancing towards the program goals, one of which is connectivity among the towns. So that's really where they would participate. And we will take some time to talk about who are the right people to join the steering committee if you are selected.
Okay, I have another question if I can ask. You talk about clustering, okay, and neighborhoods, etc. We have a discussion on density all the time on the vineyard. So it seems to be a little bit opposed to that concern and density. And how do you integrate the concern and the need to provide housing in this format?
Mhm. Is there a specific concern around density that you've been hearing?
Well, yeah, I think, yes, there is, okay? It's a matter of, is it going to be too much? Okay, I mean, how do we change bylaws? Is it going to change the character of the island? So we have more density down island that we find acceptable. Up island, it is a rural area, and I think that a lot of people use density as a concern, but it might be also kind of a NIMBY approach as well, that, maybe we don't want it.
Mhm.
And we have to address it though, because when it's in the language, we have to talk about it.
Can I just clarify something there before Christine responds? One of the particular things about our community that I know you and I had discussed hasn't really been seen in the other communities that have applied is that we only have approximately a 50% year-round occupancy rate. So half of our inventory is actually occupied only seasonally or short-term. So when we're talking about density, there's a second layer of looking at how much of our inventory is actually used year-round and how much is not used year-round.
So in regards to density, I was going to ask you what you mean by too much, because you said, is it too much? And so I think my best response is that density means different things to different people. So there could be an opportunity of really kind of getting into what they mean by density, any concerns in regards to density. For example, some people are worried about the height or the dimensions of a building. Some people, when they hear density, they think about traffic. I think there's different ways to address those concerns. And I think through this program, I will work with you to, like I said earlier, to understand what is your recipe for success. So success means helping build more affordable housing, preserving more affordable housing, creating complete and connected neighborhoods. So how do you get there, and identifying the path to success towards that? And along the way, of course, there will be concerns around density or appropriateness, but I will sit down and make sure that we come up with a work plan that will help to lead to the same outcome that we all agree on, which is more housing opportunities.
I find that a very refreshing response, and thank you for that. And I have just one more comment, and then I promise I will back off, okay? You talk about different forms of mode of transportation, pedestrian, bicycles, et cetera, et cetera. We on the island, we have such narrow roads and we don't have a lot of expansion potential. And so that is a third element that is kind of restricting. And I anticipate that with your creativity, you could deal with that aspect as well on the island.
Yeah, and that's not a unique problem. So just
good.
Yeah, it's just using my town as an example. I live in Salem. We're almost 400 years old. We also have very narrow, windy roads that need a lot of maintenance or even just completely repave our roadways. And I think one thing that we don't realize is that when you have investment in your town through housing or new buildings, that means more investment will go towards your infrastructure. Because when you have more productive uses of your land, whether you're building more, whether it's housing or businesses, that means you increase tax revenue, and in turn that helps pave your roads and maybe fund future improvements or expansions of your infrastructure, whether it's roadways or sewer or water, your parks, all your public amenities. So it really is a positive reinforcement cycle and fiscally responsible to make sure that you're maximizing economic productivity when you invite investment into your communities.
Thank you so much.
Jeffrey DeBard has his hand up. And you'll just have to unmute, Jeffrey.
I don't see Jeffrey anymore.
I think we just lost him.
Mhm.
Well, he might rejoin. Not sure what happened there.
Okay, I will take more questions at the end. We'll have plenty of time for questions, but I wanted to pause there because I was throwing a lot of information at you and wanted to make sure that I addressed some questions early on. But I wanted to talk about some of the awardees that have been part of this program over the past year. And you might get a sense of what kind of projects can be funded through this program. So in 2022, summer of 2022, we selected 11 communities to participate in this program. 3 of them are gateway cities, Fitchburg, Chelsea, and Brockton. 2 of them are regional partnerships, 1 in North Attleboro and Plainville, and the second are in Franklin County, which I will talk more about tonight. So the 6 communities in Franklin County are Greenfield, Montague, Deerfield, Orange, Irving, and Whately. With the exception of Greenfield, which is city, all the other towns are quite rural, very small populations with small town centers. So I think their example would be most relevant to the work that you are doing on the vineyard. Overall, in the past year, we have supported 11 communities with 12 service providers. So like I said earlier, we have 21 consultants that are architects, engineers, financial consultants, planners, urban design consultants. Did I say architects? I did. So they all come in to be the house doctors and provide these services. So the communities that are part of this program do not need to go out and procure services for the projects that we will be funding. So we will pay them directly and you don't have to worry about paying the bills. We have 15 projects in progress or currently scoping. 8 of them are planning or zoning projects and 7 are pre-development or financial feasibility projects. About 2/3 of the program budget in this first funding round have been committed, and the average project budget is just under $50,000. So I'll get into each of them here, and feel free to note some questions or after I go through the projects. So in Franklin County, we awarded them with up to $250,000 for the work. And my thinking for the second round is that I won't really put a budget cap. I think I will be a little bit more intentional about what each partnership or community would like to take on so that we can better budget without placing a budget cap on the overall program participation. So they have a lack of age-friendly housing options. They're an aging region. They have a lot of young people leaving the region for jobs and housing opportunities because there's simply not enough opportunity in the area. And they would like to capitalize on existing really robust regional transit service, the Franklin Regional Transit Authority. It serves pretty much the entire region of the 6 communities, but they would like to see more frequency in some of the areas, especially in town centers that have a lot of opportunity for more housing density. And in this case, I think Elaine, you had asked how could the transportation organization participate. So in this case, they had the FERDA, the Regional Transit Authority representative, join the steering committee. And after a year, we kind of figure out that they have a lot of vacant and underutilized properties, whether it's public or private, that has a lot of housing production potential. So we really just focused on making sure they get to the next step towards housing being built on the site. So in this area, they have a regional planning agency, just like Martha's Vineyard Commission. It's called the Franklin Regional Council of Governments, FRCOG. We funded FRCOG to do a regional zoning assessment. They would like to understand how to better, to make sure that each community is permitting housing in similar ways, because there's not a lot of developers that work in this region, and they don't want to go through permitting and development in 6 different ways when they can all work together, so that when they're serving the region with more housing opportunities, that the zoning is easy to understand, it's predictable across the 6 regions. So what they're doing is examining zoning bylaws and identifying barriers to housing production. So other places in your bylaw that is just not is prohibiting certain types of development when those are when there are opportunities to do so, to create those housing opportunities. And they're looking at local building permitting processes to make sure that it's not overly complicated. And finally, one of the deliverables is to come up with a housing best practices toolkit for the 6 regions, or the 6 communities. So a community-specific project in Greenfield is this property at 176 Main Street. It's right in the middle of downtown. There is the property owner here, Mr. Tim Grader. He had reached out to the city saying that he would like to build housing on his property. It's currently occupied by commercial tenants, and he would like to add housing units. So we worked with him. We provided an architect and an engineer and a real estate consultant to help him do what we call an architectural test fit, to figure out, based on the local zoning limitations and financial limitations, what can he build on this property. So we came up with addition of, it's not actually 2 floors, it's more like 3 floors on top of this building. And we, the owner decided that the parking lot behind this building also has development potential. So we were able to model about 72 units of new homes over 2 phases in downtown Greenfield. And it's actually going really well. I'm really excited about this project. In South Deerfield, they have what they call a municipal campus. So in this campus area, they have several public buildings, including the town hall, the police station, a library, and I believe a senior center. Most of these buildings are underutilized. They have a very engaged local committee that is trying to explore reuse and potential location for their senior housing on this campus. So we decided, rather than tell them, you know, you could build on this and then this is how you build it and how much can go in there, we felt that we should help them do a more step back and do more of a visioning plan, so that the entire campus has a holistic vision that creates that connectivity, not just within the campus itself, but also with the surrounding neighborhood. So we funded a campus master plan for South Deerfield. We did work with an engineer, VHB, to help them prepare some land use recommendations so that they could unlock additional housing development potential. So this is a picture of public engagement that they did one day at the campus. For Irving, similar to Deerfield, they have a vacant site behind the senior house, the senior center, and the library, a new library and an elementary school that they would like to add housing. So it was a pretty straightforward project. We were able to help them develop and issue a request for proposal for this property. And we didn't have to bring on a consultant to do this work. I just provided that service free of charge. So just to note that some of this work doesn't really require a contract with a consultant, that I'm happy to step in and just provide the technical assistance in kind. But we did set aside some funding in case they need a real estate consultant to evaluate the proposals that they receive. And this proposal is still live. It's due in September 27th, but I'm really hoping that they get some good responses. In Montague, another kind of rural area with a lot of industrial history, they have a former hospital healthcare center that was torn down by the owner, and very generously the owner decided to donate the land to Montague, to the town, as well as provide additional funds to clean up the town, and also funds for demolition. So that was a really generous gift. And because they have this large land where housing is not allowed by right, we decided to fund a project for VHP, the engineer, to come up with a long-term vision for the large site and to develop any land use recommendations that could help them unlock housing production potential in this area. So it's been going really well. Demolition is scheduled to be completed by November. And for Orange, a similar project as Montague, but without demolishing the building. So they do have a armory that is in really bad condition. There's a lot of flooding issues, and they're looking to understand what redevelopment potential for housing there is on this land. So we brought in an architect and engineer as well to come up with to do some site due diligence, flagging the wetlands, and putting together some redevelopment scenarios for the town to make an informed decision on what to do next with the land. And lastly, in Whately, oh, and I forgot to mention, for all of these projects, there are bus stops right in front of these study areas. So this one has a bus stop as well. 268 State Road in Whately, very rural town. They have a property that used to be a restaurant that burned down several years ago, but the town didn't know what to do with it. It's just been sitting vacant. So we helped them get to the next level and do some due diligence, flagging the wetlands, doing a phase 1 environmental site assessment to assess whether there's any contamination from the fire, and put together some redevelopment scenarios so they can actually see that things could be built on this property. And they're pretty happy with the results. They know that there's an urgent need for housing, so it's likely that they will, as a next step, develop an RFP to see if there are any development interest for residential on this property. So that's just a sample of the projects that you could do with this program. For the partnership, some of the expectations are really straightforward. Like I mentioned earlier, if you participate in this program, we expect you to recruit and convene diverse representation of local stakeholders for the partnership that serves at the steering committee, so that we can make sure the work that is being funded will actually help you produce affordable housing, create connectivity among your neighborhoods, reduce car dependency. We will work at the beginning to develop a 30-month work plan. So what differentiates this program for other state programs that you might be familiar with is that we're with you for 2.5 years. We're not just funding projects and leaving you to do the next step. We're here with you for 30 months, for 2.5 years, to make sure that you continue to make progress towards creating affordable housing opportunities. And I had required my partnerships to be on a monthly basis, but after a year, I realized that was too much to ask. And typically there's really nothing to check in about. So I'm changing my approach this time, that we will meet on an as needed basis when there's project updates to be had. And the benefit of participating in this program is that We do meet quarterly with all the other partnerships. So with my current cohort, they have met once together, and it's a really good opportunity to just do some peer knowledge sharing and experiences. And it's always nice to hear what other towns are doing, and it kind of energizes you with new ideas and pick up on best practices. So I believe this is the last slide. A very, very rough schedule is the application will open in October, and I will do an information webinar similar to this one. And that will be posted on MHP's YouTube website for anyone to access. We will close applications in about 6 to 8 weeks and announce pretty soon after in January of next year. And if you are selected, the partnership really has most of the work done in the beginning. So we ask for orientation in the beginning. So I will come out and meet with you and your steering committee members. We would do a work planning exercise. So from the beginning to about 8 weeks out, we would talk about what kind of projects you want to prioritize and talk about budget and scope. So once we have the work plan secured, the work will start. I will start to match up the projects with the right consultants, and the work will just be ongoing and we'll meet as needed. And on a quarterly basis, the cohort will meet and we close out 2.5 years later. And that is all I wanted to share tonight. Happy to take questions.
I think Jeffrey is back.
Hey, thanks, Alex, and thank you, Christine. Two questions. One was, I was just curious about your source of funding. And then I was just wondering about some of the sort of criteria that have to be on funding projects. You know, what are those things that for you guys are, have sort of kept you? I think you mentioned a project at the beginning, maybe it was Worcester or somewhere out there that that you chose not to support. And I wonder if it was just not being ready or what was going on.
Sure. So the first question, where does the money come from? So it came directly from the legislation, the Economic Development Bond Bill in 2021. It authorized $50 million over 5 years. So about $2 million of that bond funding is committed to this program. The rest is dedicated to the other 2 programs that I mentioned. So the MBTA communities compliance, we're providing TA to those communities. And then the majority of that $50 million is set aside for capital funds. So the idea is that with this program, we're hoping that it will generate a housing development pipeline that will need subsidies to make it work. So the vast majority of that $50 million is going to be reserved for the projects that come out of the technical assistance to get these properties project ready. Does that help?
Great. Yeah, that's what I was hoping that was that was part of the continuum that, you know, the other money would lead to.
Yeah, so it's basically just state funding. So the second part of the question, you were breaking up a little bit. So I think the question was, why did we not choose some of the communities to participate, and that we didn't select those communities? Is that correct?
Yes, it was what are the elements of the projects you haven't chose that caused you not to fund them?
Yeah, so honestly, it was just a poorly written application. I believe all of the communities that applied, I have had direct presentations or conversations with, encouraging them to apply. So exactly what I'm doing with you tonight is that I'm sharing my program information with you, encouraging you to apply. But ultimately, it's up to the community or the region just to put together the application and make a good case of why they need this funding to help you build more affordable housing and document community support. So some of these communities just didn't make a compelling case, or they put together an application where it just was lacking in detail. Even though when I spoke with them, they were very enthusiastic and excited about the opportunity. So ultimately it came down to how the application was prepared. And it's not just me making the funding decision, it's a committee of all our sister agencies. So Mass Housing, Mass Development, Mass Inc., CHAPA. We have all the agencies helping to vet these applications. So it's really a evaluation by committee.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad that you didn't say there are certain committees that are just beyond hope.
Oh no, it was a really hard decision. I think ultimately it was 2 or 3 applications that we decided not to fund, but the majority were funded. But then again, the demand might be different this time around. So
Christine, I have a follow-up question for that. Could you talk a little bit about what it would look like for the application from the Martha's Vineyard towns? We had discussed that Martha's Vineyard Commission would volunteer to interface on behalf of the towns and handle a lot of the administration, because we know town governments are pretty stretched out as far as their capacity goes, and we wouldn't want to add any more to their burden. So can you talk about what that might look like as far as the steering committee, or how MVC could support the towns and do as much as possible to relieve any burden of organizing on the towns?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're in a perfect position to have MVC apply as the lead applicant without identifying a lead community in your region. I think what the committee would probably what would resonate with the committee is that there's real documentation and evidence from the narrative that you put together, a sense of collaboration, a sense of willingness to move forward on projects and policy proposals to make it work. We like to see communities that have worked together before and have had deep relationships. Maybe you have worked together on partnering on a specific policy that, even if it was not successful, that there is some coalition building, that it has already really strengthened your relationship among the towns. And what MVC could do is, fill in that capacity gap, knowing that you have staff that could be a direct contact with me and the consultants is really helpful, because we don't want to end up with working with multiple towns and feeling like one town is just not responding to me. And there are some difficult conversations I'm having right now with some towns where they're not really spending all the budget that I've set aside for them. And possibly I have to move their budget away from to another community. So I never wanted to come down to that. So a willingness to have ideas and be engaged and move forward with some of the ideas that you bring up, I think that could be really helpful, especially with the support of MVC.
So let me just clarify. My thought was that the towns would actually apply and MVC would be some sort of support mechanism for the towns, because I think our towns have separate identities and very robust, activity. There's already a lot of affordable housing activity going on within each of the 6 towns. So if there's a way we could do that, so the towns apply and then MVC actively supports that application and the administration of it, we'd be happy to do that. The
application form has a way for you to add sections for each community, for each neighborhood. So you will have the space to carve out your scope and your ask for each community. So it's designed.
Super. Thank you.
James Haggerty. Yeah, if you could just unmute, you got it.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, good evening, Christine. I'm James Haggerty, town of Edgartown. I appreciate you coming here, giving the time for this presentation. I think the islands realize that some form, at least, of infill development is probably the most financially sustainable way forward due to supply and demand of land and the higher prices of real estate. However, kind of based on the complete neighborhood paradigm, density is going to be based on transportation nodes, but I don't think vertical growth, i.e. 3 or 4 story zoning, will be palatable to the island downtown areas. Obviously, taking into consideration what people come to the vineyard in the first place. I guess my question would be, I can see how this makes a lot of sense for the MBTA communities, but how would this be scalable to the vineyard down island towns without necessarily causing the negative downstream effects of overdevelopment of the downtown main streets and kind of other things that bring, I guess, the brand equity to Edgartown, OB, and Tisbury?
Sure. And so some of the examples that I cited in Franklin County, these are very small communities. They are absolutely not MBTA communities. They're nowhere near MBTA service. And this also includes Plainville, which is one of the communities down south, not in Franklin County, that I didn't talk about in this presentation. So in terms of density, like I think it was Elaine that brought up the question earlier, density means different things to everyone. And so we take the time to work with you and make sure that you will identify the right projects for your community. And I would imagine if we're following the model of Franklin County that I just talked about. So for Whately, they don't have any density anywhere. The most dense place is the Yankee Candle Factory that they have. And there's very little housing opportunity for anyone who works there or wants to live there. So for them, the options that they have in terms of projects is really limited, but they do want to see some development and investment go on in some of their underutilized or vacant properties. So this property that had a restaurant that was burnt down was identified, and I worked with them to make sure that was the right project to move forward with. There were other projects that they brought up. So for example, they have a piece of farmland that is no longer working. The town owns it. They would like to turn that into housing. And after some due diligence, they decided that was not the right project. They move on to this other project along the state road that had bus service, that was served by bus. And so we work with the town to identify the type of housing typology, whether it's townhomes or 2 stories. And the picture I showed you was one of several. I just thought that was the prettiest to show. So we really take the time to meet you where you are, meet the community where they're at, to find the right type of project for you to support your efforts in creating affordable housing. So we don't just do kind of one size fits all approach. I really do take the time and meet with each of you to talk through your priorities and make sure that we're funding the right project. I hope that's helpful.
Elaine Miller again.
Yeah, again, I'm now speaking as an independent member of the Tisbury Planning Board, okay? And there are 2 projects that I have in mind, and I would like to, I don't quite understand the process, et cetera, okay, as to how we approach these 2 projects, number one. And secondly, I understand that the application has got a deadline of November, but it should start in 2023, October. And I'm wondering, I'm just speaking for Tisbury, and I wonder how realistic it would be to think that we could have an application from all 6 towns. So I guess that's more of a question to Laura. And then a question to you, Christine, is how do we deal with that? Where we might have a direct dialogue about projects in Tisbury and still move along in the process that might need to accommodate all 6 communities.
Yeah, so again, going back to Franklin County, which is why I thought it would be most relevant to you all in Vineyard, is that each community definitely has their own interests. They have their own opportunities that they would like to explore. So what I'm hoping to do differently for this round, the application approach, is that have each of the communities come up with maybe a list of priorities in terms of maybe it's planning, maybe it's policy, or pre-development, you have a site ready to go, so that I have a sense of what projects you're already thinking of before we go into application evaluation. We didn't do that the last time. We basically just said, tell us what you need and we will figure out how to help you. And I think that was a little too open-ended. So for this time around, we'll definitely bake into the application process that you have an opportunity to tell us what you're already thinking of. What are some of kind of ready projects that could take advantage of this opportunity?
Thank you.
And the other question was for Laura in terms of putting the application together.
And she can answer me tomorrow, Laura. Thank you.
No, that's okay. I was gonna say, so I think from what I understand from talking with Christine, coming up with that list of priorities with potential applications for what those priorities would look like on the ground is what she's talking about. So for like James, relating to the question for Edgartown, I know Edgartown's got like a pretty significant inventory of undersized lots. And there's been a question about like, what does that inventory of undersized lots look like? Is there potential for that? So that could go on the list, even though there's no concrete idea that we want to develop the lots, but can we look at this? Can we get assistance looking at this? I think an island-wide accessory dwelling unit program, that's something I've been hearing about in every single town on Martha's Vineyard. And talking about infill development, what it looks like in a rural community, that could be an enormous opportunity for, rural infill development that would be very gentle density, not really significantly change the footprint of our communities, but potentially add, many units. And that's something that the towns could put down as, here's something we'd like to explore, but it doesn't have to be like a specific project. Like West Tisbury has a very specific ADU program underway. The other towns don't. But what it will give Christine a chance to do, and me as I put the application together, is I think we're going to see a lot of similarities across the 6 towns. I think we're going to see overlap in some of the goals, and that may give MHP an opportunity to say, hey, 4 of the 6 towns have this particular thing as a goal. Let's put this on the map for something to explore as potential partnership. I'm getting some practice in going to all 6 towns and synthesizing the desires of all 6 towns, into applications like this. So I feel like, Elaine, to your point, I don't think that Tisbury has to have a hard and fast internal identification of what you want to do, just a list of potential things you want to explore. And I know from working with each town that there is a robust list in each of the towns. And I feel confident that if the towns do decide to move forward with this, we can put together a very strong application for MHP.
I'm just going to use your example about West Tisbury is moving along very well with their ADU program. Well, how we would benefit from hearing about that and seeing how adaptive it would be as well. So there's so much to gain from us working together and taking advantage of what each town is doing right now. Thank you.
Yeah, and speaking of rural infill, in Irving, I think that's such a great example where it's on One Care Drive in Irving. If any of you have Google Maps up in front of you, you can tell that it's pretty low density, sparsely populated. It's a town of, I think, under 5,000 people or even less. But they have amenities around this campus that included a library, a brand new elementary school, a senior center that was recently built but still surplus land. And so they decided that creating housing opportunity right there would be great for people living in that building to access all these amenities. There's a bus stop right in front for them to access regional opportunities like jobs or other places to go to in terms of goods and services. So that is a type of rural infill. Is not served by the MBTA. It is a complete neighborhood, almost there, but that's a good example of what rural infill could look like. And they're thinking about 60 new homes. They keep looking at their neighbor, Sunderland, that have a very successful project for seniors called Sanders in Place, and they love that model. So that's something that they're looking to replicate in their community.
Liz has her hand up.
Hi, Liz.
Hi, thank you, Christine. I just wanted to mention from a climate change perspective that if towns are looking at potential sites to just steer clear of sites that are in vulnerable areas like the flood zone or near forested areas, which are places that we don't really want to encourage development or redevelopment.
Absolutely, and that's definitely something at the top of mind when I speak with communities. We definitely want to identify places that have sensitive land. So picking places to build away from them more densely is actually helping conserve those sensitive areas. So we try to take like I mentioned earlier in my presentation, is to tackle everything where they cross. So that includes reducing car dependency, that reduces our carbon emissions. So you don't have to, you can walk or bike to places easily, reducing your car dependency. That means building things closer together so it's easier to get to the things. That also includes building your homes near your jobs, your school, your shops and services. So that really is what we try to do in terms of addressing climate impact. So that also includes preserving and conserving sensitive land as part of the approach. I think Shanette.
I see Shanette's hand, yeah.
Good evening. Thank you again, Christine. I just have a question. How will this program work in a more direct way? So for example, say Edgartown has a piece of land and we get approved as a group, as a community, as Martha's Vineyard community where the 6 towns are approved. And we have MVC working as our administrator, helping us with it. And say there are 2 sets of projects. Say there's one where there's ADU, because I'm seeing a lot of town wanting to do ADU. And then Edgartown has something separate that's not an ADU. So say we want to do 2 projects, one ADU where the whole group is doing it, and then another one where Edgartown is doing something separate. How would that work or play out?
So if I'm understanding the question, so if all 6 towns want to explore island-wide ADU policy, that's one project, but Edgartown has a property ready to see if housing can be built on it. Can both things happen at the same time?
Correct.
Yes, it could. I mean, it's all of my regions are doing that. So even in single communities that I'm working with, there's multiple projects going on. So for example, of Brockton, they're doing a master plan, they're doing form-based code, they're doing district improvement financing. It's all happening at the same time, but obviously sequenced in a way so that they're not getting ahead with zoning before they do the thoughtful planning exercise that is required. So yes, multiple projects can go on at the same time. And like I was mentioning earlier, each community will have the space to identify their priorities. If there's a property that the town owns that you're ready to explore redevelopment options, then I'll come in and kind of take a look at the land or get thoughts from you, like what do you need to get to the next step? Do you need to have an engineer come out or surveyor to come out to survey the land? Do you need to figure out if there's any title issues? We'll bring in consultants to do that. Do you need to just help imagination, what can actually fit on this land based on zoning and environmental constraints? We could help you through that exercise. All at the same time, well, MVC is maybe helping all 6 towns with putting together an island-wide ADU policy. So they don't have to interfere with each other other than maybe there's some budget limitations, but they can definitely happen at the same time.
Perfect, thank you.
And just to ask a further question based on what Shanette asked, Christine, you mentioned that this round you're going to raise or eliminate that funding cap, because I know when the island towns see like the Greenfield award $250,000, that doesn't go very far when you're looking at 6 towns on Martha's Vineyard, when one single unit costs in excess of $500,000 to put on the ground. So I'm guessing that that's part of what was behind Shanette's question. I'm wondering if you can, speak to what that budget might look like, and also how the towns might, through this process, were we to apply and be given the award, we could tap into that bigger revenue stream. You identified the capital improvements project and how MHP can support accessing that capital improvements funding.
Yes, great question. So the budget limitation on my program is about $1 million for each cohort. For the last round, we accepted 11 communities. So really it's just 5 partnerships. So 3 individual communities, 2 regions. I kind of did really simple math and said, the individual communities get $150,000 each. The partnerships, the regional partnerships, to get a little bit more. It was very arbitrary, and I regret it because the Franklin County region had a lot of need and I couldn't accommodate all of them. So for this round, I would, like I said, I would rather see maybe a proposed scope or list of priorities that you want to take on in each of your communities. And then when we go through the evaluation process, we will come up with the right award amount for the region. And maybe I won't take in as many communities this time so that there's more funding availability for each community that we choose, that we have more investment to make in each of the communities. So that's kind of a moving target right now. I think just based on what I experienced with the last year, I think the budget question has to be more fluid. So I can't say that I'm going to give you $500,000 to build a single home, because we are providing technical assistance so that you could have somebody build that home at $500,000. So the capital investment side in that vein is subsidy. So the capital investment is funded also through the bond authorization, and HLC, also known as DHCD formerly, they have annual rounds of subsidy that is, we call the one-stop for housing. So any housing developer will be very familiar of the one-stop application process, is where you apply for the housing subsidies. So for capital investment under this program, it's called transit-oriented development. And that probably sounds like we don't have any TOD on the vineyard, but really there wasn't the details. When the developer checks the box in their funding application that they would like to request the TOD subsidy, those projects get reviewed by MHP. We have an extra layer of discretion over what gets funded. And if they know that the project came from Complete Neighborhoods Partnership, that this project has done the due diligence, we supported this project to be ready for a funding round, then it will likely get scored higher to access this subsidy. And that doesn't mean that it cannot access all the other subsidies. There are also other subsidies to help get housing built. But this one, the TOD subsidy, is designed specifically for Complete Neighborhoods, with the caveat that there's affordable housing requirement. The 60% AMI, 25% require set aside, and no age-restricted housing. I think that's a tough one, but we would really like to encourage housing of all types. That was a really long-winded answer. I hope that helps.
That was a great answer. Thank you so much.
I'm happy to repeat any of these also.
Jeffrey again?
Thanks. Christine, yeah, just to sort of piggyback on that, does that, those relationships with mass housing and mass development create a sort of preferential treatment for other funding resources of theirs, Mass Housing Commonwealth Builder, or does the same sort of additional sort of,
I don't
help
think you see me nodding, but I'm nodding a lot.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So,
because
yeah.
the vineyard is not an appealing place for developers to develop except on the very high end. So any of those things that can encourage developers to enter the market is incredibly helpful.
Yeah, so we all talk to each other. We have a kind of interagency consortium group. It's really informal, but we all work together, and we give updates on each other's programs. So Mass Housing's Commonwealth Builder, I'm familiar with their program. They know that I have this program. So when we talk about, and we review each other's applications pretty regularly. That includes what do you call it? They have a neighborhood hub program. I review their applications. They help me out and review my applications. So we're all in conversation. So when these applications come in and we're all reviewing it together, it's on all of our radars that there's a level of coordination that, if it's not a good fit for MHP, then maybe I will refer the community or the project to another agency that is a better fit for funding or technical assistance. So we all talk to each other, and sometimes we have supplemental funding from other agencies as well. So CHAPA works with us on community engagement, Mass Housing. Sometimes they support. So they actually funded Greenfield for one of the, is it Greenfield? It's one of the communities. I think it was Montague. It was Montague. They funded a neighborhood stabilization project in Montague that we are actively working in as well. So there's a lot of collaboration and making sure that there's good opportunity to access these resources for all the communities.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? I'm not seeing any more hands up. If not, I do have one question that came in from Gail Barmaky, and I don't see her on the call anymore, but she phoned me yesterday to ask if the town of Oak Bluffs had like a goal that wasn't a specific project, but that was, how do we protect and preserve existing year-round housing in proximity to the town center? Because a lot of that, when it goes on the market and gets sold, it's at a price point that is not accessible to the year-round community. It winds up getting sold into the seasonal community market. Is that the kind of thing that the town could put as a priority with a question mark to say, can you help us, figure out a program or some kind of a solution to tackle this specific issue, rather than just, I guess the expressed concern, which I thought was a good one, is how do we protect and preserve what we have rather than just focusing on production?
I believe there's definitely an opportunity to talk about that. I think some of the ways that maybe not so directly preservation, but through deed restriction is one way to preserve affordability. And whatever that strategy could look like could come out of our work planning discussions. I think right now for me to just give you a solution is irresponsible of me, but if the vineyard towns are selected to participate, then we'll definitely take some time to figure out the right approach and bring on the right consultants to help you through that process and figure out a policy strategy to address it, whether it's one angle or multiple angles. I think these complicated solutions never just conveniently have complicated issues never just conveniently have one solution. So I think we'll take some time to figure out what the right approach is.
That would be super. I don't think she was expecting an answer to that. She was wondering if there's a way to put that as a priority, and you answered that incredibly well. So I think that all the vineyard towns could be served by, some support figuring out what long-term solutions to that through deed restrictions would look like.
Yeah, and I think example from Franklin County where their RPA, the Franklin Regional Council of Governments, it's a similar approach that they want to address housing affordability at a regional level to see if there's one or multiple approaches to preserve housing affordability or generate more housing production. I think what they're struggling with is really just production period. It's just really hard to build there because the rents are so low, but there's so high demand. So it has to be deeply subsidized. Different challenges on the vineyard for sure. But I think a regional approach could look similar to what they're doing, is to assess any zoning barriers to production in their region. I saw that Christina, I wasn't looking at the chat, and then I just realized there were messages sent to me directly. Christina had, when I was talking about density, she said density also regarding wastewater Title V. Yes, definitely. I think we have consultants that could help you through that thought process and identify the challenges and how to work with those constraints. So we definitely have consultants that have expertise in that area.
And after this presentation, I'll send around the slide deck that Christine presented. At the end of that slide deck, I think what she didn't show was the list of consultants that they work with, and the island towns, you're going to recognize at least half the names on this consultant list. It includes Barrett Planning Group, I believe RKG, Horsley Witten, a lot of groups that the island's quite familiar with that you've worked with before.
And we also try to take on new consultants that don't typically work in the public sector in an effort to diversify our providers. So we do have some smaller, maybe more unfamiliar consultants that have been doing really good work that would be interested in working in all parts of the state.
I'm not seeing anything else in the chat. Did anyone have any more questions? Oh, I see Elaine again. You got one more, Elaine, and then we're going to call it a night.
And definitely, that's what I was going to do. I just want to say, Christina, you have no idea how refreshing, I've used that term before, but how positive this all feels, and the conversation has been really incredibly uplifting. Okay, thanks so much, and good night, all.
Thank you, Elaine. That means a lot.
I want to say, Christine, thank you so much on behalf of all of the towns for giving us your time and for fielding the questions. And I'd like to say thank you for all of the towns for everyone showing up and for asking your great questions. And I will send out both a recording, the copy of the recording for you all to share, and a copy of the PowerPoint. And then I'm actually out. I'm trying to take a vacation for a week, so I will circle back with everyone after my son goes back to school in the middle of the first week in September to talk further about how the towns might want to, think about proceeding. But I would encourage everyone, all the towns, to start an internal conversation on, what your thoughts are and whether you want to continue the discussion. So thank you, everybody, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
And,
Laura.
feel free to send any questions, and Christine, I'll circle up with you. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Have a great night.
Thank you. Have a good night.